A billionaire CEO mocked a small-town mechanic in front of her entire team. But when he fixed what her best engineers couldn't, the room went silent. Fix this engine and I'll marry you. The room went silent for a beat, not because of the words themselves, but because of who said them. Vanessa Aldridge, the sharp-tongued CEO of Helix Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country, had never been known for humility. She leaned back in her leather chair at the head of the table, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she shot the line across the boardroom like a dart. On the other side of the polished mahogany table stood Deshaun Tillman, his hands still greasy from the workshop, a plain gray shirt tucked into worn jeans, steel toe boots tracking faint dirt on the glossy floor. He wasn't supposed to be there. This was a place of tailored suits, pressed shirts, and top-tier engineers who spent years in classrooms perfecting theories. Deshaun was a mechanic from Kansas City, brought in as what most people assumed was a last-ditch joke. The laughter that followed Vanessa's remark wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to sting. A few engineers smirked. One muttered under his breath, "Good luck with that. The ending the source and story." Another leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, eyes locked on Deshaun like he was about to crumble. But he didn't. Deshaun stepped forward, calm but not timid, his deep voice steady. "Ma'am, I didn't come here for jokes. I came here because someone told me you had a problem that nobody else could solve." The way he said it shifted something in the room. For the first time, a couple of the younger engineers lifted their eyes from their notepads. Vanessa tilted her head, lips curling into a smirk, testing him. "You mean to tell me," she said slowly, "that after 4 weeks of my best engineers working day and night, you're going to just stroll in here from a garage on the south side and fix what they couldn't? Deshaun didn't flinch. "That's what I'm saying." The boardroom's glass walls overlooked the heart of Dallas, sunlight cutting in at an angle that seemed almost theatrical, spotlighting the tension. Behind Deshaun, the prototype engine sat mounted on a rolling platform, wires and panels exposed. The supposed crown jewel of Helix Dynamics' next-generation technology. It was supposed to change the game. More efficient, more powerful, the kind of design that could push the company into history books. But it hadn't worked. Not once. Every time they tried to start it, it stalled, sputtered, or broke down completely. Vanessa's voice cut the silence again. "All right then, Mr. Tillman, show us." Her words carried that tone people use when they're convinced they already know the ending. Around the table, engineers leaned back, whispering, waiting to see a man humiliate himself. But Deshaun walked straight to the prototype, pulling a small toolkit from the bag he'd carried in, his movements deliberate and measured. One of the senior engineers, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, muttered just loud enough for the others to hear, "This is ridiculous. He doesn't even know the specs." But instead of snapping back, Deshaun looked up at him and said, "Engencies all talk the same language, sir. Some just whisper in ways you haven't learned to listen to yet. Dr. Dindin Desir Enerdin." That made the room pause. His words carried weight, not arrogance. For the first time, Vanessa felt something she hadn't planned on. Curiosity. But curiosity has a way of turning into something else when pride is on the line. Vanessa Aldridge didn't start at the top. People love to assume she had, but that wasn't the truth. She grew up in Mesa, Arizona, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a mother who worked night shifts at a hospital. Money was always tight. She didn't have the luxury of ballet classes or weekend trips. Her world was fluorescent lit kitchens, overdue bills, and the hum of her mom's old car struggling to start each morning. What set her apart wasn't privilege. It was hunger. Vanessa Vanessa had a drive in her bones that never let her sleep easy. She pushed her way into Arizona State University, studied engineering while juggling 2 jobs, and learned quickly that if she wanted to win, she had to be sharper, faster, and tougher than anyone around her. And she was. Her early career at Lockwood Tech in Phoenix proved it. She was the woman who didn't flinch in boardrooms filled with men twice her age. When her designs were dismissed, she stayed up until 3 a.m., perfecting them, only to present again the next morning without blinking. Promotions came fast. Jetzt den ändern der an. Respect came slower, but she forced it. By her mid-30s, she wasn't just climbing the ladder. She was kicking rungs off so no one else could use them. When the chance to lead Helix Dynamics came, she didn't hesitate. The company had bold ambitions, renewable energy engines, efficient power systems, and they needed someone relentless. Vanessa fit that role perfectly, but success carved her edges sharper. By the time she was 42, she'd built a reputation that followed her everywhere. Investors loved her because she delivered. Competitors hated her because she didn't flinch. Employees feared her because she was quick with words that cut deeper than she realized. To Vanessa, it wasn't cruelty. It was efficiency. She didn't have time to cuddle feelings. You either performed or you got out of her way. That's what made her so dismissive when the idea of calling it a mechanic was first suggested to her. Helix engineers had the best degrees, the best training, the smartest minds. If they couldn't fix the prototype, what chance did someone from a garage in Kansas City have? When her assistant told her about Deshaun Tillman, she nearly laughed out loud. Yet something about her ego wouldn't let her just decline. She saw the entire situation as a way to reinforce her dominance. If she let the mechanic in, let him fail in front of her engineers, it would only underline her point. Not everyone is qualified to sit at her table. That was why she delivered the mocking line with such ease. To Vanessa, it was theater, a show of power, a reminder that she was in control. Still, as she leaned back in her chair during that meeting, watching Deshaun unpack his tools, a memory flickered. Her father, years ago, bent over the hood of their family's station wagon. He had grease on his hands, determination in his eyes, and a way of explaining the smallest details like they were magic. She remembered standing on tiptoe to see what he was pointing at, nodding like she understood even when she didn't. She buried that memory as quickly as it came. Nostalgia didn't suit her. What mattered now was the spectacle. She wanted him to fail, not because she cared about him personally, but because his failure would reinforce the empire she had built, one that demanded respect and worshipped intellect. But sometimes the very stage you build for someone's downfall becomes the stage for your own lesson. And while Vanessa thought she was about to prove her point, she had no idea her own story was about to be rewritten in front of everyone. If Vanessa Aldridge's life was defined by boardrooms and deadlines, Deshaun Tillman's life was defined by the garage on the corner of Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. The Tillman family shop wasn't fancy. The paint on the sign had peeled years ago. The parking lot was cracked, and the waiting room had 2 chairs that creaked when you sat in them. But for 3 generations, that little shop had kept cars and families running. Deshaun grew up there. His earliest memories weren't of toys or cartoons. They were of socket wrenches, the smell of motor oil, and his grandfather humming old blues songs while tightening bolts. By the time he was 10, he could change a tire faster than some adults. By 16, he could rebuild an engine block from scratch. School wasn't his world. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't chasing grades like trophies either. His classroom was the garage, and his lessons were patience, precision, and pride in a job well done. Teachers told him he should dream bigger, but Deshaun never saw anything small about keeping someone's car running when they didn't have the money for a replacement. After high school, he stayed in Kansas City, working full-time at the shop with his father. Life wasn't easy. Bills stacked up, customers sometimes didn't pay on time, and there were weeks when Deshaun had to choose between new tools or groceries. But quitting wasn't in his blood. He kept showing up, kept turning wrenches, kept solving problems that others gave up on. And that was the thing about him. He didn't give up. It wasn't just about cars. Neighbors came to him when their lawnmower broke down, when their kid's dirt bike wouldn't start, when a generator failed during a storm. Deshaun had a knack for listening, not just to machines but to people. He didn't laugh when someone tried to describe a sound with it goes clunk clunk. He didn't brush them off when they swore something was wrong, even if he couldn't see it yet. He paid attention. That patience built trust. That trust is what caught the attention of a Helix Dynamics junior engineer visiting family in Kansas City. His cousin had car trouble and Deshaun fixed it in less than an hour, a problem that baffled 3 different shops before him. That engineer saw something in Deshaun's process. The way he diagnosed without panic, without overcomplicating, just listening, testing, adjusting. He told his supervisor about this mechanic who thinks like an engineer but works with his hands like an artist. Deshaun didn't expect a call. When Helix's assistant reached out, asking if he'd be willing to look at their prototype engine, his first reaction was disbelief. Why would a tech giant care about a guy with grease under his nails and no degree on the wall? But the voice on the other end sounded serious, almost desperate. Against his instincts, he agreed. The trip to Dallas wasn't glamorous. He drove overnight in his pickup truck, toolbox rattling in the back, sleeping at rest stops to save money. By the time he arrived at Helix headquarters, his shirt was wrinkled, his boots were dusty, but his mind was sharp. Walking into that sleek skyscraper with glass doors that opened without a sound and marble floors polished like mirrors, Deshaun felt the weight of the difference between his world and theirs. He knew people were staring at his clothes, at his hands, at the way he didn't fit the mold. But yeah, he didn't shrink. He had fixed machines older, dirtier, and more complicated than most of these engineers had probably ever touched. And that was the quiet truth about Deshaun Tillman. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't chasing validation or applause. He was there because someone asked for help, and helping was what he did best. Still, when he walked into that boardroom and heard the laughter at Vanessa's bet, he felt the sting. Not because he doubted himself, but because he'd seen that same laughter before. Teachers who didn't think he'd make it. Customers who doubted his ability until they saw the engine roar to life. People who thought a degree made them smarter than experience. This wasn't new. It was just another test. And tests didn't scare Deshaun. They sharpened him. The prototype sat in the center of the room, looking more like a puzzle ripped apart than a breakthrough waiting to happen. Wires dangled like loose threads, bolts scattered on the rolling table, and standard in signs, and a faint burn mark stretched across one of the panels from a failed test. Vanessa Aldridge stood with her arms folded, her tone clipped. Mr. Tillman, I'll be honest. You're here because my assistant swears you have some unique approach. But let's get one thing straight. This engine represents 4 years of development, hundreds of millions of dollars, the brightest minds in this field, and none of them could get it to work. So, forgive me if I don't put my faith in a guy who changes spark plugs for a living. A couple of engineers chuckled under their breath. Deshaun didn't look up from the engine. He ran his fingers along the wiring, tilting his head slightly as if the machine were whispering something only he could hear. His calmness was almost unsettling in a room so charged with tension. Changing spark plugs pays the bills, he said, finally glancing at her. But don't mistake simple work for simple thinking. Machines don't care about resumes. They care about respect, so in neither tiden and insans. The boardroom went quiet again. One of the younger engineers, a woman seated near the back, leaned forward, curious. Vanessa smirked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Respect? That's your secret. I've got PhDs who couldn't fix this, but you're telling me all it takes is respect. Deshawn shrugged, tightening a wire. Sometimes that's all it takes? Listening, watching, not rushing to prove how smart you are. The senior engineer with wire-rimmed glasses scoffed. This is absurd. Indeed, absurd. He doesn't even have the schematics. He doesn't know the programming behind the controls. Deshawn didn't look at him. Instead, he asked a question no one expected. When's the last time anyone actually looked at the wiring harness instead of running simulations? Silence. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. What are you implying? I'm implying, Deshawn said evenly, that sometimes problems aren't complicated. Sometimes they're staring you right in the face, but you're too busy proving your theory to notice. Nachten daten Prüstaken made. A ripple of discomfort moved through the engineers. Vanessa's jaw tightened, though her smirk stayed. That was when she threw the line loud enough for everyone to hear. Fine then, if you can fix this engine right here, right now, I'll marry you. So, inadam björ sarpinsu. Gasps, a burst of muffled laughter. A few of the engineers glanced at each other, unsure if she was serious. Her voice carried that mocking edge that dared anyone to challenge her. Deshawn straightened slowly, meeting her gaze. Careful what you promise, ma'am. Words have a way of circling back. The boardroom went still. No one expected him to respond with that kind of steady confidence. Vanessa tilted her head, still holding the room in her grip. All right then, go on. Impress us. Deshawn took a breath, then knelt beside the prototype. He pulled a wrench from his toolkit, movements deliberate, precise. The woman in the back whispered to the colleague beside her, "He's not even hesitating, so nada dir understatt." The older engineer muttered, "He's bluffing. He's going to embarrass himself. Hatir nindersem indin sagt." But as Deshawn adjusted a loose connector, tightened a bracket, and rerouted one of the wires, his focus was unshakable. He didn't look up at the whispers, didn't flinch at the laughter. He treated the machine the way he treated every broken down car in his family shop, like it was worth his full attention. And for the first time, a sliver of doubt crossed Vanessa's face. But doubt is dangerous when you've built your entire reputation on certainty. Every eye in the room followed Deshawn as he crouched by the prototype. The air conditioner hummed above, but it felt like silence had swallowed the space. Deshawn pulled a flashlight from his bag, angled the beam across the wiring, and muttered softly to himself. Too tight. That's fighting against the current. Den das Sir NDD in dein so. The senior engineer leaned forward, whispering harshly, "What is he even doing? He doesn't know the voltage tolerances." He's guessing Deshawn didn't look up. Not guessing, watching, so nade de si andaker. He loosened a clamp, adjusted the wiring bundle, then tapped the side of the housing with the back of his wrench. The sound it made was duller than it should have been. His eyes narrowed. Vanessa leaned back, arms folded, her tone mocking. "So what now, Mr. Tillman?" "Going to knock on it until it starts talking." Without missing a beat, Deshawn replied, "Min du der Stream, satindend." Machines always talk. The question is whether you're listening. Satin Basser Dansuder and so. That answer drew silence. Even the younger engineers who had been skeptical now leaned forward, watching more closely. He unscrewed a panel exposing the intake manifold. Running his fingers across the grooves, he found a small crack barely visible under the light. He pointed to it. "Here's part of your problem. A fracture this small throws off the pressure, makes the system choke before it can stabilize." One of the engineers stood, peering closer. "How did we miss that?" Deshawn glanced at him. "Because you were looking for something complex. Sometimes the big issues hide behind small mistakes." The words landed heavier than he realized. Moving with quiet focus, he swapped out the fractured component with a spare part sitting in the kit Helix engineers had abandoned after their last failed attempt. Then he adjusted the harness again, clipping the wires in a cleaner route. His hands were steady, not rushing, but not wasting a single second. Vanessa tapped her pen against the table. Even if you're right about that crack, it doesn't explain why the software kept stalling the sequence. Deshawn finally stood wiping his hands on a rag because the system was getting signals it couldn't interpret. The wiring's misaligned with the sensor feed. Whoever installed this routed it against the housing, throwing off the timing. The computer doesn't know what it's hearing. The room fell silent again. He stepped back, signaling to the engineers. "Power it up." The senior engineer scoffed. "It won't matter. We've tried this 100 times." To Sean Mehta's eyes, calm as ever. "Then one more won't hurt." Vanessa raised a brow, half smiling, as if she was already preparing her cutting remark for when it failed. "All right, start it." One of the younger engineers pressed the control pad. For a moment, the room filled with the same sputter they had heard dozens of times before. A cough, a stall, a whine. Vanessa smirked, ready to speak. But then the sound deepened. The engine steadied. A low, consistent rhythm filled the boardroom as the prototype came to life, smooth and strong. The younger engineer's eyes widened. "It's running. It's actually running." Gasps spread around the room. Engineers who had spent weeks failing to get the system stable now stared at the machine as if it were impossible. Vanessa's smirk vanished.